Trevor Hunnicutt, thank you so much for your time. What did you sense the atmosphere was like in the Oval Office between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky? It seemed, from this side of the Atlantic, different to last time.
My goodness, it was completely different from what we saw in February, this kind of, hostile arguing and interchange between Zelensky and the Trump administration. This time, this was, we've been calling it kind of a well-mannered, sort of more typical sort of White House event in terms of the tone. Right? Pleasantries exchanged, warm wishes, well wishes on both sides. We're making progress. We're collaborating. We're working. So the tone was completely different. The atmospherics were completely different. But we really didn't see a resolution of a lot of the same issues that these men were talking about back in February.
And there were some slightly tense jokes, shall we say. Is everyone giving the appearance of having buried the hatchet, or is it actually buried, do we think?
Well, the European leaders clearly came into this meeting with a strategy that they honed through the weekend and for some time to avoid Zelensky having the same problems that he had earlier this year. And a lot of that was essentially bear hugging and complimenting President Trump and his efforts to keep him on sides and to kind of ensure that there would be some unity, at least in the messaging coming out of this event, because it was very clear that the risk was that there would be division between these parties. And I think the Europeans came in with a strategy of let's try to see if we can keep most of these issues on the same page. But we did see some areas of disagreement, right? We saw Chancellor Merz of Germany saying that he was still in favor of a ceasefire before a peace deal, which is, Trump is not Trump's position since the Alaska summit. So there are clearly areas of difference, obviously, between Zelensky and Putin as well. And none of those were resolved. So it was just kind of decided to let's put some of those issues to the side. Let's talk about things we can agree on, like the concept of U.S. being involved in some kind of security guarantee for Ukraine. And that led to a better atmosphere.
And all the Europeans were there talking about a security guarantee. That seemed to be the focus of their visit. Is that looking more likely that the US will be involved in some sort of security guarantee, and what form would that even take?
Well, the second part of that is really the key question here. The U.S. will clearly, if there is a peace deal, be involved in something that they call a security guarantee for Ukraine, right? President Trump has said now for months that he sees economic assistance to Ukraine and the U.S. doing business in Ukraine as a security guarantee. The Ukrainians and most other people obviously don't see it that way. So now the question is, what exactly does a more formal security guarantee look like? And it does seem like Trump has expressed some willingness to go, at least to have that conversation and go down that road. And they kind of came out of this meeting not with a plan, but with a plan to talk about having a plan, right? President Trump assigned a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to go and do some work with the Europeans to kind of hash out what a security guarantee looks like, which obviously might mean a lot of European troops as peacekeepers and then some kind of undefined role for the United States that maybe is not U.S. boots on the ground, but maybe is a whole lot of weapons assistance, a whole lot of other things that Trump is more willing to do. So that's where this stands.
And is there any noticeable change in the Trump administration's position on what they've previously called land swaps?
On land swaps, yeah. So the Trump administration has said a few different things about land swaps. One is, hey, this is not our decision to make. We're just trying to broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine, and they're the ones that have to make these decisions about land swaps. However, he has also said that it's Zelensky, that the onus is kind of on Zelensky to make this deal. And given the fact that from our reporting, Putin has put formal land swap proposals on the table with Trump, if Trump is saying that it's in Zelensky's court to figure out how to solve this problem, he's kind of suggesting to him that he's going to have to at least meet Putin halfway on this idea of land swaps, which is it's a huge issue because what Putin has asked for is large swaths of land that Russian forces have not actually captured. And so that is a big outstanding issue.
And it seems like, I think there's been some suggestion, Trump has commented on that any deal about land would now have to take place sort of along the current line of engagement, I think was the phrase he used after last night. Do you think that's a position that will be here to stay, or do you think that's something that Ukraine and European leaders will have to be hammering home to try to keep Trump on, well, their message as opposed to Vladimir Putin's?
Yeah, I mean that is not at all where Putin is on this subject, and that's not at all where even a halfway point is between his position and Zelensky's. So no, that there's no guarantee that that's something that Trump will support, that he'll be behind, and certainly no signs that it's something that Putin even wants to talk about.
I'm interested in your view as someone who watches Trump very closely, Trevor. Trump in the Oval Office was talking about Joe Biden's war, and then he went off on a slight tangent about paper versus electronic voting at one point when he was asked by reporters. Is that a sign of him being on the back foot and not quite having the answers when he's fired these tricky questions by journalists?
Sometimes he will, if he's not prepared to offer an opinion on a subject, there are times when he will divert the conversation to another topic that he does want to talk about, or send the question to somebody else in the room and he wants to hear what they have to say. So yes, it is. I think it is fair to say that Trump he speaks about things when he wants to deliver a message about them, and no sooner. And so sometimes, yes, when you see him kind of shift the conversation, it's because he's not ready to talk about an issue, or he doesn't yet necessarily have a well-defined position on it at that time.
It's interesting that Volodymyr Zelensky, when he arrived, had a meeting with Keith Kellogg, the Ukraine envoy from the Trump team. But Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, is the one who goes to Russia to meet Putin. Does that work, that dynamic of having these two different envoys and the man marking two different sides, or is that leading to mixed messaging in your point of view?
Well, I think it's the preferred method that Trump has in terms of how he's executing this term, right? I mean, it clearly, even though there have been differences from time to time between the president and Steve Witkoff and other advisors that he has, Steve has been kind of his point person on negotiations generally, and so he feels a certain level of comfort with this style of having these special envoys who are not necessarily reporting up to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, but they have a dotted line to the president directly, and he seems to kind of like that. Because one, it allows out of all of his aides various different ideas to bubble up that he can choose from, and it also lets him kind of retain control of the situation entirely, because he's ultimately the one that's going to be making the decision.
And just finally, Trevor, the word of the day seemed to be trilat. Do we know if we're any closer to this trilateral meeting between Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin?
Well, we did get a little bit closer, right? We heard directly from President Zelensky that this is something that he wants, that he's ready for, and that he wants Trump to take part in. So that's movement from where we had been. Who we have not heard from on this is President Putin, who, as you saw, invited President Trump to come to Moscow for one-on-one talks, but has not, so far as we know, said anything about the three-way talks until he spoke with Trump today and indicated that maybe that might be something that he's interested in. But we don't know how interested he is in actually doing that. It seems like where this will go next is still maybe lower level conversations between Russians and Ukrainians, higher level than they had been in the past, but not leader level. It seems like there's more things that need to be hashed out before these leaders can all sit down. But the planning continues for that day when ultimately the three of them may sit down.
And what do we know that the US administration does next? What does Trump, when he wakes up tomorrow morning, decide is his next move?
Well, I think the next move we have to kind of see, one, what Secretary Rubio and the foreign ministers from Europe can hash out in terms of what these security guarantees look like. We want to see what that looks like. And then also we need to hear from Putin about the level of engagement that he's going to have in dialogues with Ukraine. So those are the next two big things that we're looking for.
Trevor Hunnicutt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.